So hello, welcome to the video and welcome to Prague. Now I've been in town for a couple of days now at the first international real world meetup of patrons to my channel. Link will be in the description below. We've had a couple of fun days here looking at the Christmas markets, drinking some beer, eating some carbohydrates and getting to know each other. And it's time though to head home. Now I flew out on Swissair, as I reported in this video, and I always like to go back on a different airline to get as much content as possible out of each trip. And when I was booking, a quite interesting option was offered to me. So today I'll be flying back to London on Brussels Air, an airline not a lot of people know, and perhaps not a lot of people have even heard of, but it's part of the Lufthansa group, and it often pops up as a booking option when you go through a booking path with one of its sister airlines in the Lufthansa group. It's obviously stopping off in Brussels. I'll have a couple of hours there before heading back up to London. Now, I'm quite looking forward to this. I'm not really sure what to expect. I'm expecting a Lufthansa style approach, but hopefully with a Belgian twist. So if you'd like to see what the experience of getting from Prague back to London via Brussels is like on Brussels Airways, stick around.
Hi, I'm Matt. I've lived in 5 countries on 4 continents. I've flown over 1.4 million miles. I've visited over 100 countries, every American state, but I'm nowhere near done. So subscribe to see where I go next and perhaps get some inspiration for your next trip. You can probably tell from my voice in that intro that we had a good time in Prague. Intra-Schengen flights depart from Terminal 2 at Prague. I transited Terminal 1 when I recently flew to Doha, and the terminals are next to each other. You check in upstairs and it's a nice airy space. Must cost a fortune to heat in the winter. The Brussels Air check-in was shared with Swiss, Austrian and Lufthansa. I was in business class, but irritatingly, the group in front of me was taking an eternity to sort themselves out. The 5 or 6 people in the economy queue all checked in while I stood there like an idiot, so I jumped across to an economy desk to pick up my boarding passes. That group was still faffing around when I left. No passport checks as my first flight was intra-Schengen, and at the last moment I spotted the fast-track lanes. It didn't really matter though, as security was really quiet at 9:30 in the morning and the fast track was no quicker than the regular lanes. Through with no issues. The chap on the economy check-in desk hadn't known which lounge I could use or where it was, which wasn't helpful, but signs to lounges, plural, eventually appeared. Not sure this was the best route to have taken, as I had to head down a nondescript corridor to get to them, but they eventually hoved into view, and although signage was quite poor, I guessed it was this one and was proved right. I headed to the left, through a drinks area with a significant magazine display. For younger viewers, these are sort of like portable websites. Runway views for the taller visitor and a variety of seating options. It was a little busy, but I found a quiet space down the end and settled in. If you turned right at the reception desk, you'd find a similar seating area, along with an interesting buffet. You could help yourself to the traditional components of a continental breakfast, plus there were tubs of various salads and dips. Plenty of breads too, and perhaps randomly, pizza chunks. There's also a drinks cabinet with plenty of juice varieties. It was a very similar setup to the MasterCard lounge I'd visited in Terminal 1, and again the weakest link was the spirits offering. Abundant beer and wine, but the spirits options were limited. I mean, it was nice enough, and it's a lounge I'd happily return to, but I wouldn't rush to the airport early to maximise my time there. Off to the gate, and the polka-dotted tail fin of my plane was just visible in the distance. It ended up being a longer walk than I expected, and boarding was in full swing when I got there. Priority boarding signs were up, but a general scrum had formed around the desks. I chanced my arm a little by coming at the desk from the side, but nobody threw rotten fruit at me, and the agent was happy to accept my business class boarding pass. I felt a bit bad at jumping the queue, but any guilt quickly passed. No dilly-dallying on the airbridge for once, and I was quickly on to this 20-year-old Airbus A319. The plane spent 12 years with Frontier in the US before joining the Brussels fleet in 2016. The Lufthansa group does really get value out of its aircraft. 2 rows of business today, and I was in 2A, a very discreet method of marking the boundary between business and economy, perhaps even a little too discreet. Easier to move than a curtain, I suppose. There was tolerable legroom, 30 inches I believe, and I was interested to note that this pitch doesn't dwindle as you head back through the economy cabin, as they often do these days. The usual buy on board offering you see on Lufthansa Group airlines, and a table that goes down and up, and an empty seat next to you. You don't always associate Belgium with good comedy, but I have to give ample airtime to the sick bag, which really made me chuckle. Fortunately, I didn't have to chuck on this flight. An on-time pushback, and I was starting to like Brussels Airlines, and as we take off, a brief history lesson. When I was a lad, Sabena was the Belgian national airline, as it had been since 1923. It was never a major airline, but had a fascinating route network, in part from Belgium's colonial past. But many smaller European countries struggled to maintain their independent airlines into the 21st century, and even though Swissair tried to save the business, the Sabena brand disappeared in 2001. Belgian aviation then went through several iterations, including a contribution from Richard Branson, before Brussels Air emerged in 2005. It's managed to stick around though, and over the years it's taken on most of Sabena's exotic African routes, and it's retained Sabena's flight code, which is why flight numbers include the letters SN. Only 1 hour and 16 minutes in the air to Brussels that morning, and the service quickly began, and with only 2 rows to serve, it was quickly completed too. I did not expect to receive a meze plate, mussels and chips perhaps, but not meze. But I'm pleased I did, as it was absolutely delicious. Washed down with a leffe, self-poured in the Belgian style with a strong head. I hope I've gone with the Flemish pronunciation there. The crew were all at least trilingual. Not a great day for ground spotting, but excellent conditions for plane spotting, not that anything really came out in my footage. And down into Brussels. No snow here. I've never flown through Brussels before, and first impressions were that it was a substantial facility, largely uncontaminated by aircraft. We were blessed with a gate at the terminal and were deposited straight into the departure zone, no connection security to clear. I had close to 4 hours before my onward flight, so headed for the lounge. It wasn't well signed, I have to say, but I spotted an escalator which was very close to the gate we'd arrived into. There's 3 zones at the airport, this one for Schengen departures, which I believe is Brussels' flagship lounge, a non-Schengen (Africa) zone, and a non-Schengen (non-Africa) zone, which is where I was departing from. The lounge guardian here warned me that I'd need to leave plenty of time to get to my gate, as there'd be a passport check to clear as I was leaving the Schengen zone, but she incorrectly said that there'd be no lounge on the far side of that checkpoint. I quite liked this lounge. There was a Senator lounge within a lounge, which I think I could have accessed to Star Gold, but the lounge was not busy and I don't think that space offered anything in addition to the main lounge offering. It's a substantial space with lots of seating options and fantastic apron views. See what I mean about the airport not having many planes? The lounge was very nicely designed, lots of different zones which were attractively decorated, lots of co-branding with Lexus, and even a person behind a desk, no doubt primed to book test drives for when passengers get back to Belgium. There was even a chocolate shop offering samples, which I managed to miss completely from my footage. There were a few hot food options, not the most attractive presentation you'll ever see, but you'll not starve. And salady fare was available in the middle. Lots of wine options. I believe that's a sparkling wine from Luxembourg, made in the champagne method, and obviously not actual champagne. Plus 4 self-pour beer taps. 2 of them were out though, sadly. Did I mention there was lots of wine, plus bottled beer if you prefer it delivered that way. And more of Luxembourg's finest champagne, substitute. The only real criticism of the entire lounge was the spirits range. A bottle of gin did show up after I filmed this, but that was it. One of the 2 functioning beer taps was leather, so I was able to continue my session. I didn't do badly here, I thought. Poured in the European style, so again there was ample head. But I was quite pleased with myself, given that beer taps in lounges usually explode all over me. Overall, I rated this lounge quite highly. It's a business class lounge, so don't expect luxury, but the space was comfortable, well designed, and, spirits notwithstanding, it was well provisioned. Indeed, the communal parts of Brussels Airport were very pleasant too. I don't think I was expecting to transit a shed in a muddy field, but as Brussels isn't often mentioned in anyone's list of Europe's finest airports, and given there were very few planes actually using the facility, I was very pleasantly surprised and quite impressed. It was a bit of a walk around to the B gates, and as expected they were guarded by a passport checkpoint, which I rapidly cleared. And again, the communal areas in this part of the terminal were really quite pleasant. I'd allowed plenty of time in case the passport checks delayed me, so even though the lounge guardian had said there was no lounge available to Brussels passengers in this part of the terminal, that hadn't sounded right, so I went to take a look anyway, and I was waved into the Diamond Lounge with a smile. This is a contract lounge, so it wasn't quite up to the overall standard of the Brussels lounge, and I got the sense that it is managed by the same people, so the offering was eerily familiar. If you transit a B gate, don't despair. There is a lounge, and it's decent. Off to the gate, and whenever you're asked to descend a floor, your heart sinks as you realise it's going to be a bus gate. Again, boarding was well underway as I'd lingered a little too long in that second lounge, and I didn't have the gall to barge to the front this time. It wouldn't have mattered anyway, as I had to stand on the bus, and as this was the last bus to depart, we had to wait for the stragglers. Not a premium experience, but I should have got there earlier. The bus duly deposited us beside a plane parked up at the A gates. Brussels Airways obviously decided it was better to bus all passengers around to the Schengen gates rather than move the plane around to the non-Schengen gates. It's probably cheaper to do it this way, which was a slightly disappointing case of choosing cost over customer convenience. Up and around and on to this 20-year-old Airbus A320. This airframe spent its prime years with Vueling this time, before moving to Brussels to enjoy its twilight years 6 or 7 years ago. 3 rows of business this time, the same very subtle demarcation, and I was in 2F. I'd say there was a little less legroom this time, but otherwise it was all very familiar. A nice Christmassy touch up the front of the cabin this time. All that faffing with the bus made us about 10 minutes late pushing back, but there wasn't that much traffic at the airport, so we were quickly away. 58 minutes in the air to London that evening, and no meze this time, but the tart was nice enough. This time with some red wine. A little bit of stacking and zigzagging as we came into London, but it was a clear night and some of the views we got were spectacular. London really is one of my favourite cities to arrive into when the weather behaves. I flew out on Swiss and paid £370 for the return flight, so this half cost perhaps 185 quid, which I think was pretty reasonable value. I liked Brussels Airlines. They obviously cut and paste most of their service ethos and structure from their sister airlines in the Lufthansa group, but that's no bad thing in my book. If you fly on one of them, you'll have a pretty good idea of what the others will be like. And I really liked Brussels Airport. It felt a bit like uncovering a hidden gem. Being objective, neither the flight nor the airport experience benchmark well against the world's very best, which these days means pretty much any trip within Asia. But in the downscaled environment that is European aviation, Brussels Airlines and Brussels Airport are both pretty good. I'm already looking at options to fly Brussels again to one of their more exotic African destinations. So thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. Give the video a like if you did, and leave me a comment. Are you going to consider Brussels in your next travel planning? Please subscribe if you're new, and if you'd like to support what I'm doing more directly, there is a Patreon account, link in the description below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.